On the list of things that can destroy your business, legal issues and insurance issues are pretty high up. Welcome to this week's episode of Venture Utah. I'm your host, Cameron Porter. We've got a great lineup for you today, but before we get to our guests, I have a couple of news stories that are relevant to business owners in Utah. First, for today, Overstock.com continues to have drama as a shareholder has filed a class action lawsuit against the company, former CEO Patrick Byrne and former CFO Gregory Iverson. According to KSL.com, the lawsuit alleges that Byrne and Iverson left the company, or they let the company deceive investors regarding its business operations, management, and its value. They helped the company artificially inflate the price of its stock, allowed Byrne to sell more than $102 million in personal shares of the company during two sell-off periods in May and September, and allowed the company to sell additional shares to create a cash fund necessary to support its crypto projects. This lawsuit comes on the heels of Byrne's somewhat bizarre exit from the company after he admitted to being romantically involved with a Russian agent while participating in the federal investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election. Overstock.com's stock performance has reflected the turbulence of the last couple of months, but has generally trended downward. For any business owners that work with or rely on Overstock.com for their businesses, this is a good story for you to know and follow. Our next story is about an emergency measure taken by the Utah Department of Health intended to limit accessibility to flavored e-cigarette and vaping products by minors. The measure requires that a store be categorized as a retail tobacco specialty business in order to sell the flavored products. These stores are age restricted and primarily sell tobacco and e-cigarette products, while general tobacco retailers are simply any retailer that carries any tobacco products. This emergency measure will remain in place for 120 days, which will give the state legislature time to get back in session and evaluate potential long-term solutions to the issue. For those of you who, like me, feel like this is coming out of left field, apparently there have been 71 cases of lung illnesses just in Utah that have been linked to vaping, so apparently this is a thing. Our last story today is a sad day for anyone who has been trying to avoid paying sales tax. Amazon will now be automatically charging Utah customers sales tax even if they are buying from a third-party seller on Amazon's platform. Utah has more businesses per capita selling on Amazon than any other state. And regardless of how you feel about this change, it will definitely have an impact on businesses and consumers. It should be clarified that this is not a new tax. Technically, purchasers of online goods were already responsible to pay the sales tax for the transaction to the state because, you know, the first thing on my mind after I buy a new set of Star Wars pajamas is, well, better make sure I go out of my way to pay more money for this than I have to. So while this may not be a new tax, the economic implications of the change will be the same as if it were. Brick and mortar retailers are largely celebrating the change as it helps make their prices more competitive with online competitors. That's it for our news stories, so we get to move on to today's guests, which I am very excited about. First, I'd like to introduce Rusty Ferris from Choice Plus Insurance, an insurance broker who is going to give us the lowdown on what your business needs to know about commercial insurance. Rusty, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so first question for you. How long have you been doing commercial insurance?
I've been doing insurance in general for over 20 years.
Wow, okay. What made you decide to get into insurance?
It really just started out years ago as a CSR, and then it just evolved from there, where I was, you know, it was just a good fit, loved the sales. Now that I'm older, I just love being able to help the clients and make sure that they're insured properly, and so, yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. So today we want to talk, focus in a little bit on commercial insurances. Business owners, they need to be insured in some way, shape, or form. So my first question is, I've heard the terms commercial insurance, and I've heard the term liability insurance. Are those the same thing?
Essentially, yeah. There is language that is going to be kind of standard across the board, but commercial insurance, general liability, workers' compensation, business auto, those are lines of business within commercial insurance. So you just want to make sure that you have the right type of insurance for your risk.
Okay. So when a business goes to get that insurance, is it usually done as one single comprehensive policy, or do they kind of pick and choose?
No, the agent, or when you sit down and talk with someone, they really need to understand what your specific risk is. If you're a mechanic, you're going to want, garage keepers for vehicles that are in your custody while you're working on them. If you are a dealership, you're going to want lot coverage. So the specific coverages are different. They are tailored to dovetail off of one another. And so general liability, workers' comp, they dovetail off of one another, and there can be a little bit of overlap in coverages, but to get a full viewpoint of what your specific risk is, you really need to sit down with an agent, get a good overview of what your exposures are, and make sure that you have the right line of coverage and the right,
So they can be really specific then.
Yeah, because it's specific for, there's some general ones out there, like a small business owner, a simple BOP policy, but...
A simple what policy?
It's called a business owner's policy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just basic general liability that covers a business owner versus a garage policy. So there's specific types of policies that you can get, yes, but again, it can be very specific to, your overall risk.
So when you add on those kind of specific types of policies, is that coverage above and beyond what the general liability? Is it just more coverage? Does the general liability not cover those specific things?
Well, for example, like you take your specific business, you're going to want general liability, but then you might want coverage for inland marine, which is going to cover all of your cameras and computers, and a shop might not have that. They might, theirs is more tools and whatnot. So yes, there are coverages that you want to add on. There's general liability, but then you're going to want to add on lines of business to protect you on what is specific to your business.
Okay, so it seems like, obviously these policies cover things that might happen to other people as a result of what we're doing, to protect us financially, but to cover their costs if something happens. Do they also cover the business owner themselves? So like if I fall off a ladder while I'm doing something?
That would probably be covered under workers' compensation, but as an owner, you can even opt out of that. You don't have to pay for yourself to be on workers' comp.
Oh, interesting.
You can, you have to cover it for your employees, but you can opt out of it depending on price. A lot of owners do. So.
That makes sense. I didn't get workers' comp insurance until I got my first employee. What was I thinking? I should have had that. So that's okay. That's really cool to know. So workers' comp. Now, workers' comp has always interested me because at first I thought it was completely run by the state. Is that the case?
No, the state offers a really good program, and they have really good rates. And as a new venture, you most often will probably get the best rate through the state. However, there are other companies that will offer it, but they usually require a 3-year history to prove, which is why new ventures or new business owners will go through the state for the first initial couple of years, and then they can start to package it with their general liability, because like I said, if you start to overlap, you get discounts on each separate policy. So it's beneficial to the to the business owner to take a look at that.
Okay.
So that's why you probably hear a lot coming through the state, is because if you're a new venture, that's typically where most people go.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So there's workers' comp, there's general liability, and then there's the more specific things, like you mentioned inland marine for things like our cameras and stuff. That makes sense.
Business auto.
Business auto. Okay. So how does a business auto policy differ from like just a homeowner's auto or a car owner's policy, a personal policy?
Personal line, there's a couple of major differences is, the limits of coverage are quite a bit more on a business owner policy.
Oh.
The exposure is more. You're using it in business, you've got signage on the vehicle. If you're, typically claims are a lot higher on a business auto than, you're out on the road a lot more than somebody who, might just be going to and from an office. So the premiums are higher because the exposure is higher, but the coverages are also a lot more extensive and than just a personal lines policy.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And on a business auto policy, you also have to consider what other employees may also be driving the vehicle.
Correct. Yeah, you've got to add those, or they're not. Typically, they're not covered unless you add them and add that exposure.
Now, do their personal driving histories affect the rate that you get if you add them to your business auto policy?
They can, yeah. Just depends on the carrier. There's some carriers that don't, you know, a couple minor violations don't take into consideration, but if you've got some major activity, then yeah, that can cause a hiccup in your premiums.
Gotcha. Okay, so I guess something just pumped in my mind. It's a little bit of a change of gear here. Unemployment insurance, is that considered the same? Would that be underwritten at the same time as a? It's
a separate policy, but yeah, okay. you could essentially get it. So you're talking if somebody gets unemployed and they just want coverage for. So explain to me a little bit more what you're asking.
Well, unemployment insurance, I know I needed to get it when I started hiring employees. So I would assume it's in case they get laid off or something like that.
Yeah, that's probably more the state, or disability insurance is something that we would sell if you're injured on the job and you still want to get a paycheck or somewhat of a paycheck till you're back at work. Yeah, different carriers offer different types of programs.
Now, is it pretty common for you to see businesses that you would consider to be underinsured?
Oh, all the time. Mm-hmm.
What are the gaps that they usually have?
So it's really important to make sure that you're insured at least a minimum of 80% of your overall value and exposure. There's a co-insurance and there's penalties if you're not. And so that's probably, excuse me, that's probably where the gaps can come into play. I also see a lot of claims denied for, you know, simple wear and tear. Insurance is there for, you know, a sudden loss occurrence. You know, your typical wear and tear stuff is not covered under. So there's gaps there that I see a lot of times.
Okay, so gaps in terms of they don't have enough coverage.
They don't have enough. They're probably not taking, you know, things into consideration, keeping things updated, putting policies and procedures into place. Yeah, those types of exposures.
Interesting.
If that makes sense.
How much, this is a hard question to formulate, how much subjectivity is there, you know, so if, say you have two video production companies, one of them has very firm, solid policies in place that their employees are supposed to follow, that they're trained on. One of them is more kind of loosey-goosey, they just kind of let people do their thing and say, hey, don't be stupid, and that's their policy. Is that something that an insurance company would evaluate as part of the process, or does that really not come into play?
I mean, it really can depend. The agent is the one who's going to go out there and actually meet with the company, and they're going to do the initial underwriting. They're going to see whether or not you've got somebody who's loosey-goosey or following procedures. If somebody who's loosey-goosey, their typical claims history is going to be higher than somebody who has policies and procedures into effect. Okay. So less claims history, you know, people will insure themselves to value, make sure that the exposures are covered, those types of things.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so it's you know, it's going to have a lot more to do with your history as opposed to. Well, I appreciate you being here.
I'm sorry.
You're fine. You're fine.
I have a bit of a cold. Apologize.
Oh, you're fine. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming in. And we'll be having on Peter Richens next. It'll be fantastic. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our next guest for today is Peter Richens, attorney at law, and he is going to help answer some of my burning questions and hopefully your burning questions about legal issues that small businesses can face. So in our conversation, we're going to first talk a little bit about startup companies, people who are just getting launched or they're about to get launched, and then we'll move on to businesses that have been established a little bit more. I've known Peter for a little while now, and I've had a chance to get to know him. He has done work for my business and me personally, and I have been very pleased with the work that he's done, and I know that he is going to be a fantastic expert to join us here on Venture Utah. So real quick, before we have him come on, I would like to do A reminder to anybody watching this that if you'd like to be on Venture Utah, you can just go to ventureutah.com and click on Become a Guest. There's a form there you can fill out, which will let us know that you filled it out, and we will get to you as soon as we have an opening that we feel like is appropriate for your business. And without further ado, we have Peter Richens, attorney at law. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Cameron.
Okay, so question number one. I think we get right down to brass tacks. So, for a business that's just getting started, they have very limited resources, limited money, limited time, limited knowledge. What are some of the legal issues that they need to address as they're getting going?
Well, and that always really depends on what the business is. You know, for example, a garage or like we were talking about before, an axe throwing business, you know, is going to encounter different sorts of challenges from, say, for example, a law firm. Okay, so an axe throwing business where they demonstrate how, and then let people entertain themselves by throwing axes. They're going to want a liability waiver, and a really solid one that's been drafted and reviewed by an attorney. A law firm, they're not going to need that. They are going to need malpractice insurance, and so it really kind of depends. And a business that's first starting out, when they have limited resources, of course, it's always going to be an owner's judgment call as far as whether or not, do I want to expose my company to this much risk for how much time until I've got the capital, to pay an attorney and get those kinds of things in place? That's always going to be a judgment call. From an attorney's point of view, I would certainly say get your malpractice insurance and get your liability waiver put in place as soon as you can.
So for a startup company, you've got two partners. Let's just say you've got these two partners, they're starting a business together. To all of us who have been there, we know that they need to get something in writing. They need to have their articles of organization, and not incorporation. What's the other one? Operating agreement?
Well, it really depends on the business type.
Okay.
Okay, because a corporation, they are going to need their articles. They are going to need, maybe corporate bylaws, and sometimes these things need to be filed with the state, and sometimes they don't. Officers of a corporation, probably need to be identified, and if they have authority to, for example, sign for the business, those articles of incorporation or similar state-regulated documents would have to be regularly. Now, as opposed to an LLC, where it's not exactly articles of incorporation, because well, there's no shares in an LLC, right? There are members, and there are managers, and there are different kind of documents. And so you can go from a corporate structure all the way down the spectrum to a sole proprietorship, and it really very much depends, again, on what those documents are. So if you want a more complicated corporate structure, then you're definitely going to want want an attorney's help, I think.
So how would you explain to those two business partners, they're best friends, like we're never going to fight over this, we're never going to have issues over this, we trust each other, we're okay with the handshake, and we're good. How do you explain to them the need to put something in writing?
Okay, unless you're going to go to your graves and your life situations are never going to change, right? Then yeah, I guess the handshake is going to be okay. But the reality of the situation is that people change, life situations change over the course, of a person's life, and eventually, And eventually, one of the partners is going to need some kind of accommodation from the other, and the other partner is going to call that obstreperous. That's one of...
What's it? What?
Obstreperous.
Obstreperous?
My professor from law school, he used to use that term all the time, obstreperous. But basically, he's just being difficult, right?
Okay.
And so life situations are going to change. And naturally, you know, the relationship between those two people is going to have to change, and the one person might not be okay with it while the other person absolutely needs it. There's always going to be some kind of things go sideways, in which case, ideally, you've got something in writing.
To at least guide you as you're figuring it out, right? As you're navigating what has happened. You know, somebody needs to leave the business, somebody dies, and their share of the business goes to their wife.
Right.
You know, another partner wants to come on, an investor wants to come on, and they're in disagreement about whether they should let it happen.
Okay.
I mean, there seems to me to be so many unknowns.
So let's take the example of, you know, like you said, where the wife passes away. You know, the wife of one of those two partners passes away. And I guess, you know, maybe in this instance we're talking about a partnership or a limited partnership, which is in the scale, you know, closer to sole proprietorship than it is to the corporate realm, right? But say that it's a partnership, and the wife of one of the... Actually, let's change the situation.
All right.
One of the partners dies. Does the wife get that? Is she allowed to step in? Right? This guy, you know, partner number two, may not believe so. The wife might believe so. Partner number one may have told the wife, yeah, absolutely, you are going to take my share of the business. But partner two maybe doesn't know about that. Okay, these kinds of things really do need to be addressed and agreed upon, ideally in writing, well beforehand.
So is there, in addition to that, you know, so getting the partnership agreement or the operating agreement or whatever it is that's going to govern things together, on another side for startup businesses, are there any hiccups or pitfalls that can come with trademarking?
There are, and as far as trademarking goes, it's the same sort of thing. You know, how much do you want to expose yourself to risk, you know, versus how soon can you pay for or accommodate for, you know, your own trademark protection. You know, the risk, I suppose, is small in terms of if someone else is copying you, then, you know, they might pull some of your business away. So it's really protection. Do you want trademark protection in place? Trademark or trade dress protection in place to prevent someone else from, you know, copying what you do. You know, and once again, that's just kind of up to each individual business owner's judgment call. You know, how soon do I want to do this? I would say that it's very important to get a knowledgeable intellectual property attorney involved who could, you know, who could maybe advise and who could certainly register for those trademarks for you.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So for a business that's been in business for a while, they've kind of figured out the operating agreement, they've got their trademarks figured out however they want to handle that. What are some of the ongoing things? Well, I guess let me get more specific. Contracts.
Okay.
Everybody, you know, they're wondering about, I wonder all the time, you know, with this client, do I need a contract? Or do I just go ahead and do it and take them at their word? What kind of, does an email count as a written record? You know, what are all these kind of nebulous questions? Can you clarify some of those?
In the law, okay, people are making contracts all the time. even if they're just verbal or implied, okay, but contracts are made all the time and they don't need to be written in order to be enforceable. All that they need to be is an agreement. So one person says, I'll give you this, and this person says, I'll give you that in return, and they promise things of legal value, even whether or not those things are actually exchanged. There's still a contract. So every time that that a customer walks in to your business and says, I'll buy a hamburger for $5, right? That's a contract. And contracts can be of all different kinds. I would say most business owners enter into contracts with at least 3 different kinds of people: customers, employees, and vendors. And once again, each business is unique as far as what the needs are going to be. A restaurant is going to have numerous vendors, needing their food supplies, and they're going to need their interest protected in that relationship with that vendor. There's relatively little risk involved in the contracts that restaurant has with its customers, and that's usually covered with insurance sorts of things. But I suppose that if a restaurant really wanted to, it might be off-putting to the customers, right?
Yeah.
But I suppose that if a restaurant really wanted to, then they could say, hey, we're going to have all of our customers sign this to protect our liability. Maybe it's a restaurant that serves, 5-alarm chili or something like that. They might want something like that. But the typical restaurant, they're thinking the risk is manageable and I've got insurance.
Sure.
So that's not necessary.
Okay, so there's kind of a line, there's a spectrum between the verbal contracts and the written contracts, and would you say there's somewhere that they kind of meet in the middle where there's a tipping point where, okay, we should get this in writing just so it's a little more easily provable? Or is it more of a details thing?
And that's, once again, up to each individual business owner to judge how much risk they're willing to engage in. But the more specific the contract, the more that business owner is going to be protected. And that's where you're really going to get value out of an attorney's perspective, and a lot of value out of the attorney's efforts to draft that for you, to draft that contract for you. Because, the attorney can say, this is specifically the kinds of things that you need to be protected against, all right? And ideally, the attorney can also say, let's look at it from this perspective as well and make sure that you're protected that way. Or let's look at it from this perspective also and make sure that you're protected at it in that way as well. And he will draft that as specifically as is necessary to make sure that that business owner's interests are protected.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much. This has been very educational. And real quick, if people are wanting to get in contact with you to talk more about your services, what's the best way to reach out?
They can contact me at peter@peterrichенslaw.com.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. All right, our next guest is one of our vision partners, Joe Rangel with To Evolve Coaching. Now, I've known Joe for a little over a year now, and I have been a patron of his coaching services. And personally, as viewers of the show, consistent viewers of the show will know, I have been very much affected by the coaching services that Joe has provided, and they've enabled a vast improvement to my business and my personal life. And so it is with great pleasure that I invite on Joe Rangel for his very first episode of Venture Utah. He will be providing over the next little while tips and training and coaching services to help business owners here in the state of Utah to grow and become better and become more fulfilled in what they do, and to become more confident in what they do. Before I bring him on, I'd like to do a quick shout out to Robin Hood Studios. That is my company. That's the company that produces Venture Utah. Robin Hood Studios has a package called the Unlimited Videos Package. And what that is we come to your place of business, we set up our professional gear, and we shoot for up to 60 minutes and film as many videos as you are prepared to film in that hour. So this is very well designed for things like Facebook videos, if you want to do YouTube videos, if you want to fill out some videos on your website, do some frequently asked question videos, if you want to vlog, those sort of things. We film as many videos as you're prepared to film in the hour. We take the footage, we edit them all into the videos that you asked for, send them to you ready for upload, all for $400. And if you are willing to come into our studio here in Clearfield, instead of having us come to you, we can do it for $300. Robin Hood Studios is all about bringing the highest standard of video production quality to the smallest of businesses. And the Unlimited Videos Package is just one way that Robin Hood Studios does that. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome on Joe Rangel with 2 Evolve Coaching and Consulting. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Cameron. How are you?
Good. I'm great. I'm very excited to have you here. So, Joe, I guess my first question for you would be, what made you decide to get into coaching?
About 20 years ago, I was in a really low point in my life and had big, massive relationship problems, validated myself almost always through a relationship, never felt whole and complete on the inside. And even though today I get to travel around and speak to thousands of people around the world every year, and it's a lot of fun, about 20 years ago, it wasn't fun. And I decided to drive up in the mountains and take that ultimate checkout. And I got to come back from that, thankfully. And when I came back from that, I decided I really wanted to help other people not get into that stuck position in their life. Some people, think about suicide. Some people don't think about it. Some people get into ruts, that are not that deep. But most of us get into some kind of a rut almost on a daily, if not momentary basis. So I came out of that and thought, first off, I was kind of mad that I was still here, and then I decided, well, if I'm still here, I might as well make a change for people. So I started a path of self-discovery, going through hundreds of workshops, books, anything I could do to try to start bettering myself. And one of the first things I did is start reading The Greatest Salesman in the World, and started taking the scrolls that are in that and applying those to my life. And then I became affiliated with The Greatest Salesman in the World, and worked there for about 3 years, and from there it just kind of progressed forward. I became certified or certifiable. But,
One thing that struck me most about you when we first met, and we actually sat down, we went to lunch, and at that time I was not in a great space in my life, and I was shocked at how clearly you understood me and how intuitive you were in understanding where I was at and why I was feeling the way I was feeling, to the point where it actually frustrated me. I got angry. I don't know if you remember this, but I got angry. And it wasn't until later that I was on a run, and that has kind of a cleansing effect anyway, and so then it really started to become clear that coaching with you is something that I needed to do. So in that regard, I guess the follow-up question to that would be, is there, what in your journey as a coach has given you the ability to understand people the way you do?
Well, I believe I was pretty intuitive before that happened, but I came back with a deeper level of understanding for pain and frustration after that happened. I've gone through challenges with money. I've gone through challenges with weight loss. I've had challenges in relationships, in my life, and what I feel, I kind of talked to a group the other day, and I said, look, I'm very imperfect. I never want to be put on a pedestal. That way I get to relate to all of you other imperfect people out there. So I think we're perfectly perfect in our imperfections, and those things make us who we are. And at the same time, if we can learn to understand those and process through those and realize we're a perfect masterpiece of creation, even with that stuff, then we can start to shift the way that we think, and we can change people's lives. To kind of piggyback on The Greatest Salesman in the World, I found an assessment, through that process, which is the Habit Finder assessment, but is an earlier version of that. through that assessment now, even though I'm pretty intuitive and can sit down with a person and just talk to them through things, that assessment gives somebody a takeaway that's a written takeaway that they can actually see how their thoughts are processing. They can go beneath the surface of behavior patterns and actually look at the thought that's driving the behavior pattern and work on the thought so that they can make a permanent shift instead of just surface coding things all the time. And I was kind of introduced to that when I first met the coaches that I was working with, and kind of went from there. I kind of almost feel like I'm that hair club, men's hair club. I'm kind of I went through all the coaching, and that helped me get to where I am today. So I want to share that with other people.
Okay, gotcha. So talking about that assessment, would you say that an assessment like that would be the best first step for someone looking to do coaching?
I do. I mean, we've been told that by going through the assessment and understanding your thought processes, we've been actually told that you can gain things that you can not gain through years of therapy. A lot of times, not discounting therapists or consultants, but they ask questions and questions and questions to hopefully finally get to a solution. Our process actually starts off with understanding where your thoughts are, so we can very specifically work on you to help you move forward. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's very objective, very accurate. It's been around since the 1940s.
Wow.
It's as accurate to a person as a fingerprint. It actually can be, the statements that are in there can be ranked something like 17 quadrillion different ways. It's pretty amazing. So each assessment is very unique to that person, and then I give a free complimentary session, which because we sat down and had a conversation.
Yeah.
And it starts off with that, and to me it's important that there's a connection and validity in the process. Like if I can sit down with somebody and they can connect with me, and then they can hold that process as valid, and they can see the report is very accurate, then that's a really good first step to moving into something further.
And knowing where you're at now, and then you mentioned being able to connect the thought with the behavior that's causing an issue, and the thought patterns. So how do you change a thought pattern?
By being aware of it. So the first thing is awareness. I believe if you can become aware of a thought, most of us, we know what we do in life, we know how we behave in life, we know the things that get in our way. Most of us don't really know sometimes exactly what causes us to do those things that get in our way. So if you can become aware of a thought, then you can start to choose a different thought. So think of like a bad habit. If you have a bad habit, that bad habit started off somewhere in your life. Most of those things happened on accident. They're usually a protection mechanism that came about through some life experience. But then they start to perpetuate themselves, and they get in your way sometimes. Creating good habits kind of works the same way. So if you can understand there's a bad habit in the way or a bad thought driving that, then you can start to become aware of that. You can shift the thought at its core. Give yourself a better thought. Understand you have a choice. And then over time, develop that new good habit, which shifts your thoughts. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Understanding you have a choice is the first thing after being aware. If you're aware, then you know you have a different choice to make. Once you have that down, then kind of wash, rinse, repeat.
That
develops the habit.
That seems so simple.
It is, but it's not easy.
And is that what you find? Is that the hardest step, is getting someone to recognize what the thought pattern is? Or
yeah, if you have an understanding, or that there's hope to shift. A lot of people that have been through like any kind of a therapy or counseling or anything like that, a lot of times they lose hope because they feel like they can never make a change because things keep coming back. Even food, even addictions, these things, bad habits perpetuated further are addictions. So we can even help people overcome addictions pretty simply, but it's not easy. I read just recently, statistically speaking, it can take you up to about 281 days to create a new good habit if you're fighting against an old bad habit.
Wow.
There's a lot of these misnomers out there that it takes 30 days, but that came from a long time ago. Maxwell Maltz wrote a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, and in that book he said it could take around 30 days, and then people kind of ran with that. But it can take a lot longer if you have a bad habit that's in the way that keeps popping up and perpetuating itself.
281 days.
Almost a year. It could, and that's an average. So for some people it could be even longer. But think about it, and you start a habit in 30 days, whether it be exercising, running, not smoking, anything like that. As soon as the old bad habit starts kicking in, it's very difficult to maintain the good habit. Even eating. You know, a lot of us struggle to eat better all the time, more healthy all the time. As soon as you have that one little piece of chocolate, it starts to become more difficult again. So, or drinking water or anything like that. Yeah.
You know, that makes a lot of, as soon as you said exercise, it's like, oh, I get it, been there. And that makes more sense when you're, so it's not so much developing a good habit out of nowhere, it's when you're trying to develop a good habit to replace a bad habit. That's what takes an average of 281 days.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, like if somebody were relatively healthy and they wanted to start drinking more water, that would probably be pretty simple for them. If you like soda and Mountain Dew, iced tea, whatever else, sweet tea, anything like that, Kool-Aid, anything with sugar in it or bubbly, guilty. But if you were to have that habit in place, then it can make it very difficult to switch to drinking water, because water is not quite as exciting.
No, it is not. It is not.
But I know it's healthier for you. So but that's an example, prime example of that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you start out, you help them, they take the assessment, they figure out, and that kind of gives a window into the thought patterns that are driving their behaviors. And then they identify some of the bad behaviors or bad habits that they would like to change?
Well, I show people the good ones first, because I think it's important to accentuate the good. There's 36 different measurements in the report. Out of those 36 different measurements, usually somewhere around 6 to 8 are really off balance. But most people focus on what's wrong. I like to focus on what's good first, with an understanding that a lot of times you can't listen to that good information until you start to get those bad habits out of the way. So when I do discuss a bad habit, I talk about, well, here's the habit, here's the way that it could affect you, here's the balance that you could be living in, here's how you can kind of get there, and we want you to focus on the balance, not on the out of balance, not on the challenge.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So starting with the good, and then leading into what can be improved, what can be changed.
Right.
So one thing that I found interesting and surprisingly helpful when we started our coaching process was the reading of the book, The Greatest Salesman in the World, how you read each scroll 3 times a day for 30 days. Now, is that something specific to Evolve Coaching, to Joe Rangel, or?
No. So I'm a licensed affiliate for the Augmendiano Leadership Institute.
Okay.
And To Evolve Coaching kind of falls under that. The book itself prescribes those scrolls, so anybody can go buy that book and do that themselves. Using it in a curriculum with very specific designs, where a scroll is designed to help somebody in a specific category of thought process, I think that adds benefit to it. But as far as reading the scrolls, anybody can go buy The Greatest Salesman in the World, anybody can pick it up and read it, and anybody can read the scrolls 3 times a day for 30 days. If you do 10 scrolls, that's 300 days. That's developing a habit, if you see that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I would agree with what you said there, but about having it as part of a curriculum, because it was very valuable to have that piece, but it was made so much more effective and valuable for me to have the other materials and have my meetings with you to kind of help me go through that and figure out how it applied to me. So if people want to get in touch with you to do the assessment or the complimentary first session, what is the best way to reach out to you?
So probably the best and easiest way to reach out is go to 2evolvecoaching.com. That's the number 2, evolvecoaching.com. And then on that page, they can actually take the assessment. There's a link there for them to actually click here, take the assessment. And on that page, there's a link that they can click on and actually schedule themselves into my calendar. If that's difficult for anybody, they can call me on my cell phone. It's 801-850-2974. That's 801-850-2974. Or they can reach me on email, which is joe@2evolvecoaching.com. And again, that's the number 2evolvecoaching.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Joe.
You're quite welcome.
It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Take care, Cameron.
Thank you.
See ya.
All right, so that is all for this week's episode. I hope that was educational for you. I hope it was valuable for you. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions, concerns, compliments, preferably not insults. Had a guy who thought I was Martin Shkreli. That was weird. We will see you next week on Venture Utah.